Filming Hayden. Yep, good.
Let's go. Let's kill billions of Hitlers.
All right.
Tonight's stream brought to you by the implacable reach of global capital.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, we are broadcasting on an Amazon platform, so yes.
It's Twitch Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh, God damn it.
Yep.
I know.
There's nothing ethical anymore.
No, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, Josiah.
God damn, that's what I should be doing my bloody thesis about.
You and Marx, mate.
Yeah. Everyone knows
Yeah,
Piotr
Kropotkin
was Oh, shit. My whole dad.
Your whole dad?
Your whole dad?
My phone was...
all five of him.
My phone was on... not on silent. Okay, that's okay.
Great.
I'm just
well, we're
getting
live.
link from Twitch on my phone.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
At least we were 30 seconds ago before I paused the stream.
I feel like if I open the stream at the same time, I'm going to get some whack feedback, so maybe that's not very wise.
Don't do it. It's no bueno. Open chat on your phone if you want to have it open, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and start anyways. Hi, everyone that's in our chat, and also hi to all the people that are on our panel today. Hope you're all doing well, and isolation isn't completely sending you, down to the pits. But anyways, today we're talking about intelligent collaborators, aka your players, and risk and reward. So basically, it just means we're talking about the philosophy of creating and storytelling alongside your player base and the importance of that. My name's Desney, and I have been LARPing for about 5 or so years now, give or take. And I created a LARP called The Hobbit's Hoedown here in Melbourne, Australia. And I created this panel just to basically bring a whole bunch of my peers together and talk about something that I'm passionate about, obviously, which is game design, and something that everyone else is obviously passionate about, or you're in the stream and you're just wanting to hang out, which is absolutely fine as well. So I'm going to give it away to Josiah.
Hello, I'm just introducing myself, I'm presuming.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Josiah. I am an actor and theatre maker. I'm also currently doing a PhD at the University of Melbourne that is studying live action role play and the Melbourne community, or the Australian live action role play community. It's changing in light of being isolated, difficult to do social research in social isolation. I started LARPing in about 2016, but I've never made a LARP. I just have a lot of opinions about what it is to play well together. That comes from both my theatre background, but also from my LARP experience. And should I pass to someone else now? You can give me a nod, Des. I'll pass to Jack.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Jack. I've been LARPing for I think almost 10 years now. My first LARP was actually a Rob's LARP Zeppelin, and I was a baby. And I played my first LARP within the same year that I played my first tabletop, and it all happened very quickly. And I got hooked. And after a while, I wanted to start making LARPs, but I had trouble getting, I would say, my ducks in a row, and ended up trying to make it into a career. And then have since tried to make sort of like a hybrid escape room LARP, which has done really well to get like average people to wear costumes and for an hour role play. But it has some challenges which are maybe the opposite end of the spectrum. So sometimes I feel like I might be unable to really provide anything useful just because my players are. In terms of intelligent collaborators, often I'm at the bottom of the barrel. I'll just put it that way. And I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Jack. My name is Robert Anderson Hunt. My pronouns are he and him. I've been LARPing since 2003 and trying to LARP since about 1995. I most recently I am the director of story for Black Powder and Bloodlines, which is an ongoing campaign LARP, very story and role play heavy, with some a medium amount of rules. So a lot of my opinions are based around that type of game, because not only Black Powder, but before that, I used to be one of the organizers for Zeppelin games, and that was the same type of game, and that's mostly what I've played in the past too. So I will pass on to Hayden next.
Hello, it's me. My name is Hayden. I have been playing LARP in excess of a decade. Before that, I did a lot of theatre and improv, and the sort of transitionary period saw me do a bit of both, and I was like, I'm better at LARP. Probably also still pretty good at improv. I have worked on creating LARPs. I've worked as a creator within LARP spaces as a player. I've worked on building things for games that I've then not participated in. So yeah, I have mostly done a lot of material contribution, and as I've gotten older and more experienced, started doing more contribution to games in less explicitly material ways. Yeah, so that's me.
Wonderful. Yes. So thank you for everyone joining us, and I guess let's move on to what we're talking about, which is our players. I guess we'll just quickly go around, sort of asking what they feel is probably the most important to them about how they interact with their player base. I'll palm it off first to Rob.
Thank you, Des. I am too slow bringing up the Black Powder and Bloodlines principles for GMing, but the way that you interact with your players is really, really important. A LARP is the players are a very significant element of that. That can vary a little bit about how important they are between whether you're running a game for one person or running a game for 100 people or 1,000 people. But ultimately, the difference between theatre and LARP is that LARP has players, as in there are characters whose performers have agency. And that they are a different cadre of characters from the rest of the world, which is created by the writers and organizers. I mean, that's a very simplistic, and there are LARPs which play with that. But in terms of your basic definition, a LARP is a game that is a game. It has players. They're an important element of it. So how you interact with them is really important, and how you communicate with them and how you build with them and all of that sort of thing. And it's a lot of my experiences, my opinions are formed about negative feedback or negative experiences that I've had as a player. So that's going to be a lot of what I, come forward with as this profile or this panel goes on. But yeah, your players are important, and the summation of all of that we like to use at Black Powder and Bloodlines at Immersive Arts and all of the games that we run and will run in future is we are fans of our players. Those few words really try to really encapsulate what we think it's important that you should, about the way that you approach your players. You should be fans of them. They're creating a game. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about, hopefully, or challenging the idea even, that you should be fans of your players.
I'd love to hear from Jack, if possible, next, please.
So you just want to talk about an overview of the topic or my perspective? What was my intention towards the players?
Yeah, basically like how you interact with your player base and how what you think is important about how you interact with them.
Yeah, so just to explain our format, we have an hour or an hour and a half in which we put the players through a really focused, very tightly controlled narrative where we give them a certain amount of freedom, but we don't take risks that are outside of certain bounds because it's much more of frankly, it's much more of a business. And so for us, making sure that everyone has a really good time, no matter what they're bringing into the game, it's crucial. It's kind of like we can't get away from it. You know, we are slaves to the customer side of things. In terms of our intention, well, we're just trying to make sure that the players leave a little bit more conscientious than they went in. In regards to risk and reward, we're not taking giant risks with our players because we're not always engaging with. I'll put it this way: whenever we get players in who have tabletop experience, we're much more comfortable giving them more power and seeing where they go with it. But we also cater to people who may never have done tabletop before, and so with those people, our intention is just to have a safe place for them to have or to create good memories with their loved ones, really, and then leave a little bit closer. I hope that answers the question.
I'd love to hear more on your. So Robert was talking briefly about how our players are someone that we love, or like our player base. We are general fans of them. How about that? How do you view your players in that?
Sorry. Yeah, well, I think,
or even in the LARP scope, even as well. Like, yeah, it's up to you.
Well, actually, my perspective on this comes from Brené Brown on vulnerability, which is that I kind of just take her concept of parenting and then apply it to GMing. And so in that way, the GM's responsibility is to love the players and teach them that they belong despite their flaws. And that's sort of the core from our perspective, I guess. Sorry if I got muddied down in the business side of things, but from our perspective, we've just got to, even if they try to go off script or frustrate us, we have to have a sort of parental patience and love with them. Despite that, and at any point we can't let them frustrate us, because that's sort of it's sort of undoes the whole project, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. That's really insightful. Thank you, Josiah. Obviously, you haven't had any, experience with designing a LARP, but obviously you still have some sort of interaction player to player. What makes you the most comfortable in terms of how organizers interact with you in your viewpoint, and makes you the most creatively safe, I guess?
I think it's being open to player suggestions. And that's something, I mean, I feel like my favorite LARP experiences have been at Black Powder and Bloodlines, which is, again, another game that Rob is involved with. And one thing that they always do really well through the way they foster community online is they ask people to approach them about the stories that they want to be able to tell, or to approach them with ideas that they have about the world or parts of the world that they want to explore somehow. And they do their best to accommodate that within their game. So it's curious for me, though, because I wonder what an intelligent player looks like to a designer. When I think of what an intelligent player is, my mind goes to theatre improvisation principles, because that's what my background is in. But I'm curious about how designers would define an intelligent player, and how, like, what strategies you might have to foster an intelligent community. And I know I've spoken with you, Des, about this before, and Rob, we had a chat about this as well. But maybe that's a question for later on down the track. Yeah,
I think it's definitely something worth, going into. Sorry, Rob, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, do you want us to field that question now, or leave that for a bit?
We'll quickly go to Hayden, and then I think we'll jump to that question, because I think that's a great place to start.
So I think one of the big things about, like, whether or not you are or should be a fan of your players is sort of predicated on the assumption of whether there is such a thing as a bad idea or a bad offer in a play space. because I think that while there's no such thing as an objectively good or bad idea, I think there are things that people can sort of generally accept by consensus, whether they're good or bad. And I think coming from having been a player for a long time, one of the mindsets you get into really easily is you see other players do things that you consider and that are generally considered via consensus to be bad ideas. And if you transfer that mindset to designing, it can put you into this bad state of you see a player have a bad idea and you crack down on it, which as a designer, you have a lot more power in that space, and it sucks for that player that you do that to, even if, again, the idea you're preventing is bad. So for me, I think being a fan of your players is important, and I think it's valuable because I fundamentally believe the best way to produce good ideas creatively is to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. And that quantity-based approach to ideas and offers is by necessity going to produce bad outcomes. And I think, as Josiah mentions, like improv principles, I also come from an improv background that was focused very much on competition and quality. And we found when we focused on having the most competitive, highest quality scene possible, they were always worse than when we trusted one another to make decisions and rolled with whatever was created. And I think it's good to have that mindset in LARP, because if you can train or create a culture of play within your player base where people know that they're allowed to have ideas at an incredible rate, and you trust them to have good ideas or bad ideas and then sort of roll with what works best, you're going to have a better time than if you don't trust your players as much or aren't as big a fan of their work, and then you try and crack down on those bad ideas where you see them pop up. Because it's always better to let to sort of throw those ideas into the space and see what happens with them. Because even and you see this a lot when you look at sort of new role players be like, hey, I'm looking for role play tips, and people will share like these lists of like writing advice for fan fiction, which is sort of often very orthodox rules of what to do and what not to do. And I think LARP is a different creative space, and you shouldn't treat it as orthodoxly as you do something like writing or theater or performance, where you have an audience to perform to. Which is a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, that's sort of how I see it.
Okay, great. So now we'll just circle back around to Josiah's pointed question, which is he was curious about what a intelligent collaborator or a smart player looks to us as designers. Am I wording that correctly, Josiah?
I guess the question's like, how do you define an intelligent player? And then the follow-up to that would be, how do you foster the conditions in which that intelligence can occur?
Okay, wonderful. I guess I'll go with Jack first.
Yeah, I have a really simple answer, and I'm sure I'll learn something in a minute for everyone else. Mine is simply a good communicator. So I suppose the one advantage of our layout is that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new people coming through, and when I'm running at one of the games, I'm GMing through security cameras and I can hear them, and we're putting them through situations that are both conversational, philosophical problems, and also puzzles. So I feel, apart from combat, we're getting about the same level of difficulty or similar challenges, and by far, good communicators are, I suppose, the most consistently happy and fulfilled players by the end of the game. And it's the players who struggle to communicate what they want or what they need or what they're feeling, who we can't accommodate to, other players can't read and then accommodate to as well. And thus it becomes much more random whether or not they have a good game or a good experience or leave with the message we were trying to give them. And I don't know if I necessarily have the answer of how to foster that, other than, of course, what you say to them beforehand, and and I think this gets into the NPC conversation, which I think is a huge topic, which we'll get into later tonight. But and then I think your first line of defense is the quality of your NPCs, and how prepared they are to handle the situations. But yeah, that's all I really have to say on that for now.
Yeah, no worries. Great. Yeah, I guess for me myself, just coming off of the back of what you said, yeah, great communicators are an asset, definitely a boon. For me as well, I guess just people who are curious, not only about the game that is at hand, but about themselves. I find that if they are a curious player, they're a much more adventurous player. And it also means that they are keen learners. And I mean, I guess that's the dream for me, because I myself see myself as a keen learner, and I hope that when a scene presents itself to me, that I can sort of support everyone in it to the best of my abilities, and also really get as much out of it, as much as possible, really like squeeze as much juice out of it as much as possible, to really feel very like present and engaged in the experience that's happening. So yeah, I guess I tend to look for engaged participants, and the way that I try my best to facilitate that is generally through knowing that I have to be their cheerleader, and my team of other organizers have to be their cheerleader as well, and therefore trying to sort of create a culture of people being incredibly supportive of each other, because I think that we feel safest to make those explorations when we do indeed feel safe to make those leaps, and I think that that's probably one of the more important parts about facilitating that, is to make sure that people feel safe to engage with your game. Rob, would you like to speak on this?
Yeah. Look, I absolutely agree that players feeling safe and comfortable is 100% vital for them to engage in a live role-playing game of any sort. Because I actually think that the notion of what makes an intelligent collaborator is a bad way of thinking about it. Because ultimately, someone doing LARP well is someone who is playing the part of a person in a world. And that's something that, the vast majority of people just do normally. Like, the idea is that in order to do LARP well, you should not do LARP at all. You should just be, because LARP is being something. And so you have to approach the game with the presumption that everyone, given the opportunity, given safety, given comfort, given encouragement, given resources, is going to be an intelligent collaborator. I always think of the word intelligence in the old like D&D wisdom versus intelligence debate, where wisdom is worldliness and general sensibleness, and intelligence is the capacity to make informed and reasonable decisions. But when those reasonable and informed decisions are towards the end goal of being someone, everyone has the capacity to do that, because everyone is someone. Some people are many someones. Some people are not very good at someones, but everyone can be someone. And so everyone coming into a LARP has the capacity to do LARP well. So it's important that we recognize that as a fundamental step. There are no stupid players, because if you're going to say that some players are intelligent, you have to say that some are stupid too. It has to exist on a spectrum. So what's important in this being a fan of your players concept that I spruik hard is saying, no, everyone has the capacity to be an intelligent player or a good player. Everyone has the capacity to play the game, i.e. be a person, So it's on us, the organizers and writers, to ensure that they're given an environment that will allow them to do it. Because every time a player overhears you and the other writers on the Saturday night stripping out the NPC who they killed on Friday afternoon, because you didn't plan for that, because you didn't count on agency and intelligence happening in your game. Every time a player hears you, the organizer, bitching about that, that's on you. That's your problem as an organizer and a writer. They didn't fuck up because they are intelligent collaborators doing what they're supposed to do, and you, the organizer, didn't plan for it. So it's important that as a fundamental base, what being a fan of your players is always acknowledging that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Jack, did you have something to say?
Well, I mean, it's sort of beside the point. I think in regards to the danger was saying that, if we have an intelligent player, that's our yin, then our yang is that we have a stupid player, and that's why it's a bad way to, or a bad term to explore. I'm actually more comfortable admitting that I've seen some real stupidity in my games. And
players are going to be dumbasses from time to time, absolutely.
I still love them.
Conceptually speaking.
Yeah, I understand. I still, and so from my perspective, I suppose I reached the same conclusion just from a different angle, which is that I have to presume that players will find a way to react, let's say, in a non-intelligent way to setups or characters that I think are perhaps obvious, and then not be thrown off balance when I find myself way off script. And so in much the same way, it's then the worst thing you can do is get angry or frustrated or blame the players, because they have the freedom. If they want to do something stupid, that's fun, that's a different kind of enrichment. So, and then beside that, I have had groups come in who I'm astounded they reached the venue. I'm astounded they were able to get dressed. It's not often, but it does happen. And for those, and then essentially NPCs become scripted actors who are just leading them by the hand to the finish line, and then you give them a sticker and they thank you for it, and yeah, exactly. But that's yeah. I'm essentially agreeing with Rob in a different way. Yeah.
I guess for just coming off of Rob's point, when by no means do I mean like collaborate or like players who aren't hugely curious or anything like that aren't intelligent. What I mean by intelligent collaborators is that your players, the point is that all of your players are intelligent collaborators and intelligent storytellers. But I guess what excites me very, very intensely are the types of players who are willing to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, as Hayden so famously said earlier in this stream. But now I'm going to go and pass it on to Hayden. How do you feel?
So I think I agree with Rob. I'm not huge on the idea of intelligent, but in terms of collaborators, I definitely think it comes down to you've got to be willing to look stupid in front of other people, and you've got to be willing to have a bad idea and let people see you have that bad idea, or if you have a good idea, you've got to be willing to let other players run with that in a way you either don't expect them to, or to be honest, don't want them to. Because you will be doing the same thing with the ideas other players have as well. In the same way that no designer's plans meet the player base unchanged, no player's offer to other players will go the way they expect or wanted it to go. And you've got to be prepared for that. And as a player, you've also got to be open to, and this is sort of like, if you want to get into the idea of like players also as curators of the space, like for you to trust the player's judge of whether an idea is like has legs, and for you to make a judgment call and be like, cool, players have made all these offers in this short span of time. This is the one we're all going to go with, and then all your players sort of gravitate around that idea and run with that one. So I think, yeah, as a player, you've got to be open to looking dumb, and you've got to be open to losing control of ideas and offers that originate with you. In the same way, I think you have to have those as a organizer, but definitely I think that's like ideal players are like that, which also comes down to that curiosity, wanting to see what happens. So not having attachment to the idea, but being like, if we put this out there, what happens with it?
That's actually, from a writing and organizing perspective, one of the best ways to encourage this intelligent collaboration approach from your players is seeing actually a great analogy that a junior writer used. I think I've used this on the panel before. Was that he was saying that he felt like he was building all of these intricate sandcastles and buildings in his sandpit, and then worrying that the players were going to come along and kick them over. And I said, no, it's important that what you think of all your creations is that you're designing and putting into place the toys in the sandpit, the buckets, the spades, the crinkly cookie cutters, and your players are going to come along and they're the ones who are going to build the castle. So it's important that that conceptual thing.
I've actually got a question for you, Rob, in that sense.
Yeah.
Do you think that so I guess the reason that Black Powder and before then Zeppelin has been fucking amazing has been that it has been like a sandbox where you've kind of planted the seeds, you've kind of set the sliders and the dials, and then you've let the players create kind of or almost like color the lines that you've drawn. I would almost say, perhaps, if you think that's apt.
Sure.
And I guess from talking to Destiny, I think she's becoming more interested in to the extent that you can maybe to a greater degree of control communicate a more specific message, or maybe create a game that's more tailored or bespoke for a more specific outcome, and which I think she started with a Hobbit LARP, and I think now she's interested in with the Space LARP. And I guess, do you, how do I put this? Do you see that there is potentially an alternative to, rather than letting the players to build the game in the sandbox, that there is a different school of thought that might emerge where the castles aren't made of sand, and maybe the NPCs are a little bit more rigid, and not to go down a quest path that, say, Silkcraft Quest may have a while ago, where it's just completely wooden, but to say that the narrative's a little bit more, I would say scripted, in a sense that it has a clear goal, and there are clear events that need to play out in a number of ways so that the story can still lead to the messages it's trying to convey.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely can. One of the discussions that we've had previously on these panels is about faders and about where you want to configure your game to be on the scale of player freedom and agency to linearity, or railroading, as it's often called in tabletop games. And there are a bunch of ways to set those faders too. A lot of the games that I played before I started writing them were very rigid. There would be, you'd show up on the Friday night, you'd join one of the 4 parties that we're going to play. On the Saturday morning, you would play an event that would consist of 10 to 20 fixed encounters walking down a path as you go, and at the end you'd defeat the bad guy or reach the final encounter, and then the story would progress as the organizers had written. Or even in a game where you didn't have that rigid event structure, it wasn't a linear game, it was more free form, as we like to call the type of games that we run it as immersive arts. Even those less linear games still had okay, so on Friday night we're going to put these NPCs into the field, and on Saturday morning we're going to make sure that this treasure becomes available to the players, and on the Saturday afternoon we're going to have this NPC walk into the town and give this address. And essentially the way that the players interact with those encounters or or NPCs is entirely up to them, but ultimately nothing will change depending on what the players do. What's important is communicating the level of agency that players have within these different sort of strains, because what we used to find was in those more free-form events, we would find ourselves desperately wanting to be able to change what was happening as players, because we were given the illusion of choice. And as in the linear events, we still found ourselves as players desperately wanting to be able to change what happened, because LARP was like the integral moment-to-moment play gave us full agency. It just didn't feel like we had agency in the grander scope of things. So if you are, it's like, I won't say it's easy, but it's relatively simple to run a game at different places on that fader of player agency. But it's really, really, really important that you as an organizer or you as a writer are getting across how much agency the characters have, the players have during the game. Because if it feels like they're playing fully free people in a fully free world, they're going to fucking hate you when the big bad that they thought they killed 3 hours ago shows up at the end and says, aha, I have a poorly written excuse for why I didn't get killed by you a little while ago. Because that's happened. It sucks.
Right. I didn't think anyone's going to fuck with that anytime.
No, I'm just
yeah. Repeat that mistake. But yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the difference, like, between the different places on that scale is how subtle you are about it. Like, honestly, Black Power is basically going to plan. We're just not showing how we made that happen.
So in summary, you would say that provided that the players are communicated quite clearly as to the level of agency they can expect, then we should be okay to explore. Because I feel like we've entered the new generation of LARP in that it's a sandbox with these ingredients and the players have this freedom, and then we're trying to explore what is the next level we can penetrate into, which is almost could seem like a step away from the sandbox, but it's actually a sandbox that includes sort of facilitator NPCs who are influencing the story in such a powerful, active way that the writer is or director is still able to in real time try to persuade the story into these messages or well, I would say, yeah, perhaps messages is the clearest term to use. Yeah, and I'm sorry if I seem like I'm rambling. I'm just trying to
Well, look, what do other people think about that? I mean, it's like, I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Yeah, I would say there's value to the idea of an extremely linear game with, tightly controlled narrative and, even going as far as to give your players the characters they will be playing, because that can still be fun. It's just like you have to, yeah, I agree. You have to know ahead of time that that's what you'll be doing. Because if you're unsure of the degree of control you'll be given, and again, this sort of comes back to the idea of like, it sucks when the idea you've had is taken away from you and changed in a way you didn't expect or want it to be changed. And if you know that that's a possibility, you're going to be much more prepared for it than if it's sprung on you, especially by a component of the game with more power than you ever had.
I have a curiosity, I guess, arising from this discussion, because Jack, you just made reference to kind of this latest iteration of sandbox LARPs, and I guess, like, how are we trying to innovate that and push story further, and what does that work? But how does that work? But I'm curious about, I guess, in light of that, the four of you, your design and player experiences before we reach this point, and if the notion of someone playing LARP well, instead of, well, use that phrase rather than perhaps the intelligent player, has changed throughout that period. Like, I know, Rob, for example, you did a lot of convention LARPing, or have had experience doing convention LARPing, and I know, Jack, obviously you work in an escape room with LARP-like elements, which has a different form of play and maybe elicits a different type of well-playedness as well. Yeah, how have you seen, I guess, a definition of playing well change?
I mean, I can answer just my version very quickly to leave room for the next person. I think initially it was just how good the person was at making you believe they were that character was the first, was initially what a good LARPer was just like, were they convincing? Was their costume good? You know, that kind of thing. Like, did you actually feel immersed? And then it became, was the character they were playing as in line with who they were as a person? Were they actually digging deep enough in themselves to get a character that had a soul? And now it seems like we're heading towards this realm of like, can the players actually leave better people or deal with something that they have so far not dealt with? And one way I'm putting it at the moment is, can we approach the unknown and then create positive associations where they may not have existed before, and create situations where players are able to enter into the unknown, whether that's to do with their own confidence or whatever it is, and then walk away better for it. And so for me, that's the progression that I've personally seen. Yeah, I'll give the next person now.
I'll go, but mine's pretty short. But it's just like, when I first started, the play space I was involved in was incredibly elitist, and I was part of that. I was incredibly elitist as a player for a very long time, and it felt almost libertarian, because if like a player was doing something, if another player was doing something you thought was bad, you'd be like, ugh, they're so garbage, and then you wouldn't ever tell them that. And so no one helped one another improve, and it just sort of went around in that circle of people thinking they were better than each other for making better choices. And I know that's something that took me a long time to sort of get out of that habit. And I think over time the player base has become sort of, and in a general sort of sense, the culture of players has become a lot more collaborative and a lot more based on mutual feedback and honest feedback. At least within groups that see one another as peers, there's still elements of that elitism, especially in larger groups where, you know, the player base might be more stratified. But I know certainly myself and Destiny have indulged in some extremely elitist, like, you know, stuff in regards to player bases.
Just throw under the bus.
Yeah, just like drive by, like.
No, but I think it's important to acknowledge those histories, actually, because I think of that like as an actor. When I was young, I thought I could do a whole lot of stuff, and then I'd see actors that I was like, I can't do that. And now I'm at this weird moment where, when I'm not working often as an actor, which thankfully is rare now because I'm part of an ensemble called Melbourne Playback Theatre Company, which is very lucky for me. But I'll be watching a show and I'll be like, I could do that. I'm better than that person. This is stupid. Which is not very, I don't like that part of myself, because I don't want to work in a community where I will be judged that way. And so I have to check myself about judging people that way as well. So it's curious to know about that journey from, you know, what did I behave in an elitist way and what changed for you? And how does that affect the communities of players that you want to foster now as designers?
Absolutely. I guess for me, as Hayden said, like, I mean, when I first started LARPing, the group that I was a part of had literally just started, and I'd come from a cosplay background, so I already had like a lot of costuming experience. I was studying English as a major and creative writing, and non-fictional writing, just writing in general at my university. So I was like, oh, I am all over this. I'm so across this. It hurts my feelings how much I am across this. And I immediately kind of didn't really get humbled, I guess. But when I went to my first quest, which is such a broader player base, I was like, I appreciate feeling like I'm part of a fabric of a greater community, way more and above being like the center of a cult of personality. And yeah, I guess Hayden and I have had experience with that feeling. I know that once I stepped away from that, what was important to me became how do I improve the overall like well-being and skills or whatever of the people that are in the community with me. And I think that Swordcraft started to, for example, started to move towards that of like, oh, like it's actually garbage if we're just like, you know, trying to like one up each other, but like we're not really learning anything, and that's not actually fun. And I think other LARPs like After the Fall and Black Powder and Bloodlines attributed to that movement as well, because, you know, there was less emphasis on a competitive spirit of the game and much more of an emphasis towards the story of the game. And I think when you get into warbands and stuff like that, it can get a little bit clicky, and it can be really sort of like a horse with blinders on kind of thing. And it's not until you sort of step away and get to know other people in your community and experience what it feels like to contribute to it that you sort of start to realize why it has more value to you. And I know that I think that as a LARP designer, that's what I'm trying to contribute to my player base now, is to give something of value to my players that they think is important to them and that they cherish as much as I'm trying to sort of like really relish in still telling a story with them as well.
Yeah, if there's something in your play space that you think is garbage and then you take no steps to try and like remedy that or at least explain to the other players why you think it's garbage, all you're doing is just letting a thing you think is garbage continue to be in the play space, which is insane. And again, something I've done so much over the years. And it's like you could be wrong for a start. You could just be wrong about it being garbage. But also, like, if you take no steps to try and help other people improve, then you're just letting the space you're in be bad as far as you're concerned. And why would you want that?
I think that it's no coincidence that everyone has sort of described this same transition that they've undergone or seen around them of starting in LARP and being, you know, sort of competitive and trying to get ahead, and then gradually moving towards seeing a community where it's important that people help each other and bring each other up. I think it's possibly worth pointing out that as someone who's been in the community longer or been in LARP communities longer, is to point out maybe or to say that I think personally it's not so much that the community does this. It's that individuals go through this process as LARPers of learning that, oh, it's not actually like what I do doesn't have quite as much impact on how much fun I have as what all of the people around me are doing. So, like, while we can see this wave in the people who've come to LARPing from Swordcraft community, building up and overtopping and going, oh, actually, it's a better game if we all work together and help each other. There are different LARP communities going through these processes at different phases because there are different individuals all over the LARPing community, all over the world, going through different phases. And, the aggregate of the Australian scene is X many years behind the aggregate of the Danish scene or the British scene or bits of the US scene or whatever. So it's important to acknowledge that there are many different LARPing communities, and they don't all have the same gradual generational phase. The reason we have something akin to that in Victoria is because a bunch of people including myself, have gone to pretty great lengths to like describe the community as or a certain element of the community as a thing which has gone through successive phases, because we've seen multiple games running at the same time go through these phases mainly by coincidence. And that's another like long talk, but I think it's worth pointing out that this thing that everyone's described seeing, even Josiah talking about theater, of going, I'm really good and I can see that they're not as good. It's going through that process of being able to critically assess what other people are doing and then be able to give critical feedback. Getting to that point is really important, and the faster you as an organizer can foster that within your LARP community, the faster everyone will sort of be brought up to that same level, because critical thought is damned important to being able to do LARP well, because you're not just being a thing, you're also thinking about how you be the thing and how everyone else is being the thing around you as well. So it's useful, to be able to critically engage with not only your own material, but that of other people and all of the stuff around you.
Also, the GFC happened and individual competitiveness is being abandoned across broader culture.
Also, capitalism bad, yes.
Yeah.
I'm curious then, sorry, tell me if I'm asking too many questions, Des, because I know you have like a list of topics that you want to run through. So maybe before I jump in, okay.
Just hijacking the panel for your thesis, Josiah.
It's true. I'm recording the whole thing.
This is it. This is the opportunity.
I know. I'll never get you in a room like this again.
Except like next Saturday or what?
Well, yeah, that's true. I'll just call you when I want. It strikes me, if I want to summarize what sounds to be like some principles that are coming through in the kind of spaces that you want to foster for your players or the kind of player communities. And I'll list them and then you can let me know if you think, oh, yeah, that's good, or maybe I'm missing this a bit. But I'm very curious to have a bit more of a chat about criticality as well, how you foster critical players or how you move a community to that. But I might list these principles so far and you can let me know what you think. The first was... Oh, and I wrote these all down, but I'm just going to show you. These are my notes that I'm keeping, but they just make no sense now. So I'm like putting things here and there. So I'll work backwards. So it sounds like creating a space. From Rob, it sounds like we have to acknowledge that as LARPers, we're all on individual journeys through a kind of almost a skill of LARPing. Like I'm competitive to. I want to work together with people. And I imagine then we want to be able to create spaces for players where they can go through that journey safely, I suppose. Because I'm thinking about this from the perspective of I've been playing a D&D game with some friends for about 5 years. And one of the things that we keep acknowledging is like, wow, the way we built this world together could only have happened because like, at the sophisticated level that we're able to do it now, because we've been playing together for this long, but we wouldn't be able to play in this sophisticated as a way back at the beginning. But equally, if we want to bring new people into the game, we have to give them the opportunity to make mistakes and be a beginner as well. So I imagine then a principle would be creating a space that's safe for players to be a beginner. It sounds as well like we want to encourage players to be humble or have some kind of humility as well. But also, on the flip side, encourage them to take risks that they can learn from or that they can support other people with their stories. I'm curious about this notion of being open to losing control of an idea. It be that a designer's story or a player's story, but still taking that as a risk anyway. Or a kind of, perhaps a twist on that would be being willing to fail. And there was another one I had here, but I can't find it. So I'm just going to leave that for the moment. Oh, acknowledging that everyone has the capacity to do LARP well. It's just about giving them space to develop that capacity, perhaps.
There are no bad LARPers, only things that you fucked up, organizer.
Right on.
Yeah.
I'm having said all that and got on that long tangent, I'm curious now about this notion of creating critical players. Firstly, is that something that you now all want for your games? Like players that can be critical as they play?
Yeah, certainly I would agree that it's something that we want. I think that, well, I certainly haven't figured out how best to equip them in that way. And so far, my attempts to do so have been pretty random, like with random success and failure in equal parts. So I don't have any answers.
I guess my LARP touches on this. Hang on.
We can still hear you, Des.
Right. No, I just for some reason I was getting a video call from Kenyon. Anyways, sorry, very random. But I guess my LARP kind of touches on trying to equip players with tools as much as possible, in terms of actively going out of our way to be like, here is a workshop, this is what we're trying to achieve together, and also talking to our other players and GMs, trying to really connect them to other people, maybe trying to partner them with people, or having people in our player base who we consider to be role model role players or role model players in the scope of what we're trying to create in our LARP, so that we're trying to really try and have like a cohesive or almost a homogenized sense of good players, so to speak. And that means that everyone in that community feels safe. They feel like they're not just completely lost, because at least if we give them we're like, hey, remember, if you feel like you are lost, you can do this. Or, hey, remember, if you feel like you're out of social batteries, that's okay. Having a rest is a completely valid mode of play in this LARP. So we really are trying to empower the player by giving them, by literally saying, these are the tools, here they are, they're in your tool belt now, or at least some form of them. And as much as possible, trying to be like, we are all in this together. So it's completely okay. Maybe you fuck up. It doesn't matter. There are no mistakes, I guess, in an improvisational scene. There are only happy little moments of tomfoolery. So, really trying to emphasize that there is a lightheartedness to play, and that it doesn't have to be world-ending if you get it wrong. Has been kind of key in terms of how I've been designing LARPs, and how I want to go forward or press forward with more, I guess, more dramatic LARPs, is that I still want to be able to bridge that gap where players might feel like they don't have the tools, but that we will be able to support them in some way if they feel as though they aren't really fully equipped, whether that's emotionally, whether that's improv style techniques, or even costuming, just all the elements of LARP that I feel like some people, when they go to start a new LARP, that they and ah about. And maybe reconsider whether or not they should buy a ticket or not, because I don't know if I'm going to be accepted if I'm not perfect from the get-go.
I think for a bunch of those reasons that you've outlined, Des, it's important to have a mix of players and people in your community who are at different points on that journey we're describing. It's important to have a bunch of new people. It's important to have some people who are very experienced and know what they're doing, because they can give tips and pass them down the chain. It's important to have people who have a general sense of what they're about, because they can learn from the older people and they can take some of the burden of teaching off of them and hand that knowledge down. And it's important to have new people, because they keep the older people excited. I mean, there is nothing more engaging for me being at a LARP than seeing someone who's at their first LARP and how amazing a time they're having, because LARP is so much fun. And one of the things that you forget once you do it for ages and once it becomes like your life is how much fun even the worst LARP is. Like, unless you are actually just going to events and having a mental breakdown and screaming at people, LARP is pretty damn good. So anytime you hear me complaining about older events, chances are I still had fun at that game. It's really important to have people at all of those different stages at your game. As organizers, like, right for the old, right for the experienced, right for the new, every time.
I realize now, just to double back to what Josiah posed about criticality, and I said I don't really have any answers, but I suppose I should share my working rather than just saying that. So basically, because a lot of our players don't realize the level of freedom that they will even get in a tabletop sometimes, because they might not have played them before, I suppose one of the challenges we're facing is that it takes them one game to realize the level of freedom they have, and then we can show them the degree to which they actually have the ability to interpret things and resist the narrative that's being fed to them. So in the last world that I made, it was like there's a character who, spoilers, but I'll try to make a parallel so that I won't ruin it for you. But essentially, there's a character saying that there's only one way forward, and it's up to the players to stop and realize the other option is right in front of them, and it's right there. And so a lot of people will just take the ending that was given to them, and it's sort of bittersweet. And I suppose the third ending is they fail and die. I suppose that's always there, but provided they don't, they kind of get the canon ending, which is a bit bittersweet, and then people are on their way. And I was realizing they weren't getting the critical realization that I was wanting out of them. So what I would then do, and this isn't necessarily applicable, but just to explain how I've arrived at what I said before, is I would show them at the end of the game the potential outcomes that were available to them and which one they got. Sort of like you'd get a trophy for which ending you got in a video game. And that way the player was able to realize in that moment that they had the options the whole time to make decisions that they might not have even have empowered themselves to be able to make. And that's as simple as having to win for a change, for example, which is I'm trying to be vague enough that you don't clue into what I'm getting at in case you play it. But and so I suppose I was able to prove to myself that I was able to create a critical realization in them, but I'm still working on how to control what it is. And that's the next thing for another room, which I haven't really gotten to yet. So I know that it's possible, but I haven't yet cracked. If I can, I'm going to educate you on this now, and they will get that realization. I think I'm just making them realize that there's more than meets the eye, and that hopefully opens their eyes a little bit generally, but I haven't gotten to the deeper level yet, which is why I said I have nothing to really teach or add that's constructive.
It's really interesting, Jack, that you say that you've got an idea about how to teach people, but you don't know what you want but you don't know how to make sure that the message is the precise thing. Because I would have always, whenever I'm faced with that kind of problem, I have the opposite problem. I'm like, I know what I want to say. How do I teach this? How do I get this message across? I just find it really interesting that you're having the opposite problem.
Different format, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're in such a controlled world, but we really can put them anywhere we want. Well, after a lot of testing. But yeah, but then it's getting to what are we realistically able to really impart upon someone within an hour and a half, really. And
I mean, look at cinema. Cinema's an hour and a half. How many thousands and thousands of messages is cinema able to impart? I don't see what I don't see what the problem is, Jack. Get to work. We'll try harder.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay, wonderful. Hayden, did you have any input that you wanted to?
Whether it's good to have critical players, or whether you should encourage players to be critical?
No, it's more of how do you facilitate or create critical players? I believe that was the question, Josiah. Great.
So, for me, it comes down to teaching players that they can. So, rewarding sort of, or saying, hey, you know, there is space here to be critical, but it's also because it reminds me of some video games have mechanics that like fall outside of what we expect video game logic to be, and in a lot of the reviews of that game that does that thing, you'll see people get really mad about it because the game put in a thing that is not how games are supposed to work, but is, you know, more like something from real life. Like, you know, a top-down CRPG where your characters have to eat and go to the toilet. No game has, like, fucking... like, none of the major top-down CRPGs, you know, have sort of like, oh, yeah, your character has to go to the bathroom and has to eat regular meals or they die. So if a game were to introduce that, they would probably shit people up the wall. So it's about sort of, you know, teaching their players that it's like, yes, a lot of games have common logic, and it's okay for you to question that. But you may want to explicitly tell them that, or you may want to have something happen early in the experience that suggests that that is a possibility to them, depending on how subtle you want to be about it. I probably lean more toward being less subtle, but basically letting them know that it's okay to question the space they're in and question the logic of the space. Because, you know, if you turn over every rock, you might find something cool. Or, as more often happens with groups of players, you'll turn over a few rocks, find something you think is something cool, and pursue that for the rest of the game, and not check the rest of the rocks. Which is fine. That's a fine thing to do. But it's about letting players know that there's the space to do that, and there's that option to do that, and that they don't have to sort of play within the anticipated orthodoxy or logic of how games are played.
Great.
That's really, oh, sorry. I was just going to say that's really interesting because it's like being critical of, I suppose in that regard, it's like the critical player is the player who's able to be critical of the game they're playing at the time they're playing it almost.
Yeah, pushing boundaries within a space. Because sometimes that's really irritating as a game runner, but sometimes it's like, yes, I was hoping you'd do that.
You've basically got to be simultaneously prepared for players to pull apart literally everything that you've built and find all of the cracks. And also you've got to be prepared for them to miss absolutely everything important. Like, these two things must both remain within your design scope at all times as a LARP, right? But unless you're running a very, very tightly controlled game, both will happen.
Well, I mean, if, and just I have a brief object example, but I remember one time I created a quest for some players in a Swordcraft game, and I gave one of the items to people who are running this tavern, where players could come in and smash the tavern up. They'd made everything destructible within it. But because they'd never spelled it out, no one did that. And because people would come in and ask, they'd just be like, hello, do you have this thing? And he'd be like, no, I don't. They'd just leave. And he was like, my character was lying to them. And no one ever thought to stop and be like, would this character lie to me? And because it's like, again, within the logic of the way the game is played, that doesn't happen. And within the logic of the way the game is played, when you're in someone's camp, you are very respectful of that space. And I remember talking to him about it afterward because he's like, no one even tried. And I was like, I think because this space runs so counter to the logic of the rest of the overall game, that would be something you'd need to spell out in some way. Because, yeah, it would have been awesome to do that and use the space in the way they created it to be used, but none of the players knew that that was an option. And because they stuck to the orthodox logic of the game, no one ever tried.
I'm just interested because I guess we briefly touched on these things from Jack and Robert. Is basically when you are trying to pretty obviously get across your vision or your story in real time in your game, I guess how important is your NPCs in terms of how you get your message across? How important are they to your style of design and I guess using them as messengers, so to speak? Rob, would you like to go first?
I would, yes. As a LARP writer and runner, you have a very limited number of tools at your disposal to actually get the game across. You have pre-game information, like things that are written down and given to the player out of character for them to work with. That might be a character briefing. It might be the rule book. It might be a blog post on your website. It might be having a conversation with them. That suite of tools is generally useful for setting expectations, but pretty useless for getting over any more story than anything more complicated than like here's why you're in conflict. Different groups of players go. You have during the game you have physical props, which are often best at building immersion, but they can also be things and vehicles for story because physical place tells a story or could have information on the prop, like physical written information or clues of a physical nature or whatever. And everything else other than pre-game information and physical props, that's your NPCs. Personally, I would much rather have a game with no props and no briefings than a game with no NPCs. Because the most engaging thing for a person to interact with is another person. Because they have words, they have vision, they have body language, they have physicality, they have a sense of space and place, and they can make things up, they can ad-lib on information that you've given them. They are the single most powerful tool that you as an organizer have access to. And while there is certainly another entire panel worth of material about dealing with and briefing and running NPCs, like, hey, your NPCs are important.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, maybe we should, I don't know if I have got down NPCs as another panel, but perhaps we should. I will write that down.
Yeah, like there's easily like hours and hours worth of material on them, but in the interest of staying on topic, I won't go into that. I'd love to hear what Jack thinks.
Yes.
Like you, I presume, have much more physical props available to you in Yukio.
So I guess it's worth explaining that your average escape room doesn't have, or if it does have an NPC, it's sort of like a bit of a gimmick or a bit of a quirk. I have played escape rooms where they've had physical people walking around as like security guards during there was this really great one by Pop-Up Playground where they actually had a security guard walking around and you had to evade them, which was...
I played that security guard.
Maybe I dodged you one day and we didn't even know it.
Hiding in that vault.
Yeah, yum. So much cocaine. But typically speaking, the reason that I'm classifying the escape rooms at Ukio as LARP escape rooms is that because they have actual NPCs, in the sense that they are dynamic characters with their own agendas, their own goals to accomplish, or secrets, and the players have to use conversation as a tool to delve deeper into the story. And if they don't, then they either won't be able to finish the game, or they're going to walk away with no understanding of what just happened, which is what we consider to be a fail on our end. So for us, a success is a player who just comprehends and leaves having had a good time and everything like that. So the for us, it's the importance of, let's say, puzzles, which I'm going to put in the same realm as something like combat, are as important in LARP as they are in our escape rooms, and the story and the NPCs are more important and just as important as they are in a LARP. And so, the difference is that we have one game master who plays all the NPCs, and we do that with a huge script of pre-recorded voice actors who we're then able to, using a computer system, and we have to train operators extensively to get good at this system. They're able to play different characters, not necessarily simultaneously, though in some scenes, using automatic pre-scripted items, but they were able to jump between different characters with a completely different voice actor doing a performance in a sound booth that we've perfected, so that we're able to operate a cast of NPCs without the need for a crew of actors available every night. And that's kind of our trick, so to speak. That's kind of our hook. And so for us, the NPC is the game master. And when I've talked to Des about this actually, and we've had a discussion about should NPCs be considered. I suppose the word NPC is a real catch-all that we've inherited from maybe it did originate from tabletop, but it seems like it's more relevant to AI than it is to our application.
I would say possibly video games, non-player characters, NPCs.
No, it's in like the oldest D&D handbooks and stuff.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
But I think that the modern connotations of it are that it's a bit of a vacant vessel of story, and it isn't necessary or a fodder for combat. Whereas I feel that where we're moving towards, and where Des wants to take things, is that the title of NPC needs to be broken up into some other more appropriate titles.
Fun fact.
Sorry?
Fun fact. The original D&D handbooks all say that you've got two categories of non-player actors within the world that the game master will play. One of them is monsters. One of them is NPCs. Monsters have this type of rules. NPCs have this type of rules. So it's fascinating that the gaming community has melded those two together, but we as LARPers are finding it more and more important for there to be a divergence of those two definitions.
Yeah, and I guess for whatever it's worth, and maybe we should say this for another panel so that we're not just chewing up this topic, but Des and I had a discussion about it, and we sort of broke it into three sort of realms or tiers. Where we had an extra as the lowest tier, and that's essentially where you would get your combat from, or disposable NPCs that you would hope don't really affect the main plot of the story you're trying to tell, and a great place for first-time players to just jump in and get some experience without them much risk of them damaging the narrative. We had messengers as the middle tier, which is sort of like there to provide resources or support to players, or give them clues, or to just to sort of grease the wheels of something. Maybe you could call them companions as well, or support NPCs. And then we have the facilitator as the highest form, which is so heavily briefed and so aware of the narrative and the true aim of the game that they are essentially like an on-the-ground GM, able to make decisions and make intelligent calls about maybe the way they should improvise a scene to best, as much as they can, influence it towards the true aim of the game, whether that's a certain style of conflict or a certain kind of resolution or whatever that might be. And certainly in Ukio, we purely work in facilitators. So our NPCs are active on the ground GMs, trying to corral the players to have a good time and pick up what we're trying to put down, I guess. So sorry if that was too long an answer, but yeah.
I want to apologize for taking up even more time on this topic, but in a pure giving tips to aspiring LARP writers perspective, I think personally, in my experience, it is NPCs as part of your player base are pretty rare and precious, so it's important to use them where they get the most bang for your buck, and the most bang for your buck is in that middle tier of messenger. If you've got a person playing a role that's not going to have any effect on your game, you should be asking yourself why they're there. And if it's not important, cut it. Promote them to something that has more effect on the game. And facilitators are usually that level of integration is like, why is that person not actually just a GM if they're getting that level of activity? Again, personal opinion for the types of games that I run, that facilitator level really should be a GM, and you should be finding other ways of making that kind of communication available. It's like you should be asking, why is the level of briefing that person has not something that you can give to your messenger, your mid-tier NPCs? Like, that's, in my opinion, that's what you should be doing.
I think just to maybe better explain myself, I think the facilitator isn't a GM. You could almost consider it like a direct assistant of the story. So like an active storyteller that is more intimately aware of really what's going on behind the scenes, what the true goal is. Like, I think it's reasonable to say that let's say a mid-tier NPC, you've given them a briefing, they know about some of the secrets of the world, but they're not necessarily going to be able to make decisions in the same way that you'll need a GM to sometimes, and they will have to check in. And I guess I just mean to say that there is and we're talking about veteran NPCs, veteran players who you trust, who you can essentially you can sort of say, I trust you to make the right decisions if you're faced with a difficult situation, knowing what our true aims are. And then those are sort of your champions in the game world, helping you tell the story, if that makes sense. So they're not GMs per se, but just to sort of, so in case I wasn't clear about what I meant.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks. Sorry, go ahead. We're derailing. Let's go back on topic.
It's all good. Josiah, you're looking like you maybe want to say something, or
more. I was going to try and. Here's a possible thing that's related to the topic question, but I wanted to see what you had in mind first, perhaps. Or maybe actually, I could start with you because you were the one who named the panel.
Right.
The other half of the name of the panel tonight is risk and reward. Mm-hmm. And I'm presuming those are things you are looking to provide players in order to create someone who LARPs well. Can you tell us a bit about, I guess, what you mean along those lines and how you could use that?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of risk and reward, what I'm talking about from my vantage point when I think about writing LARPs, we want players to take risks, and when they sort of are making those moves, those money moves, so to speak, we're giving them a recognition, which is part and parcel of a reward. It's not just, oh, like, yeah, you went and you fought a bunch of bandits. Here's some money. Good job, you guys. It can be a little bit more nuanced than that. It can be that maybe the aim of your game is to play into the tropes of a situation. So you're meant to lose in a scene, okay, but you did the risk taking and you played into the tropes, for example. The recognition or the reward that comes from that is that you find out something that you wouldn't have found out maybe if you hadn't tried at all. That you are sort of giving them almost, like a breadcrumb path towards an intended outcome, or that you are giving them, recognition for their own collaboration within your space, that the risks they are taking are being valued by the GM or the people in that play space, and also by your NPCs and all that sort of jazz, so that you are actively sort of trying to not only elicit the gameplay from them and their risk taking, but also at the same time really trying to empower them so that they continue to engage with your game on a level, and perhaps even like light a fire under them, being like, oh, I can do this. All right, okay, cool. Like, yeah, all right, I'm on the right track. Or if I do this, then maybe I'll do this. Maybe, and then you'll be like, but try again, or something like that, so that you're trying to, as much as possible, really give way to that curiosity in your players, because it is important that they are engaged with your game. If we are to sort of use the well-played game sort of definition, is that they are engaged, that they are interacting, and that they are relishing in play, basically.
Yeah, I think the other side of that as well is, especially on the sort of note of risk, is, I think something that we all as players have at one point or another experienced is, a role play scene that we would regard as being low quality, whether it have been because it was adolescent, or it felt embarrassing to be a part of, or no one seemed to have their heart in it, or it was just dumb. And I think a lot of LARP creators sort of, because most of them have had some experience playing, will have experiences like that in their head, and they're like, oh my God, oh, I don't want stuff like that to happen at my game. Oh, Jesus. And so you get these risk management factors. And fundamentally, I see there being two strategies to manage that kind of risk in your game, where the bad outcome of the risk is bad roleplay and bad game experience, and then the good outcome is good roleplay and good game experience. And I think those two strategies are find a way to restrict players in the ideas they have, so that the bad ideas they have are either not able to happen or are quashed immediately, or educate your players on the kind of ideas you want them to have and how you expect them to manage ideas in the play space. And I think most of us would agree that the latter option is the better one, and more suited in most spaces, although there are arguments to be made for both, and honestly, I feel like some amount of combination is good. But, I mean, it seems like, because as I said earlier, I don't believe in such a thing as objective good or bad, but there does need to sort of be an acknowledgement of the fact that there are experiences and ideas that will be widely sort of regarded by people as being lower quality or higher quality. And I think most of us have in mind that we want to avoid lower quality experiences. And so that risk versus reward is the greater freedom you give players to explore ideas, the more stuff they are able to throw at the wall, and the higher quantity of good ideas you will have, but also the higher quantity of bad ideas you'll have, because the higher quantity of ideas you have. And so when we're talking about managing that risk versus that reward, I think, and this is something I would encourage of any sort of LARP rates, is finding ways to manage that risk through educating players and managing the expectations of those players in the space, and trying to teach them to role play with one another in a more collaborative way, than trying to find ways to prevent bad ideas or crush bad ideas or drive bad ideas out of the space. Because I think that more restrictive approach also restricts the number of ideas you have, and the fewer ideas are being had, the fewer good ideas will be had. So I think that's an important thing to discuss in relation to risk versus reward, because it's something we're all going to think about at some stage when we're creating LARPs.
Coming off of what Hayden said, I think it's important when considering good ideas and bad ideas is that essentially in character, there are no bad ideas. Like from an out of character perspective, there are no bad in character ideas. Everything that happens in character is fundamentally good in like for the sake of the game. All of the things which are bad. And while I disagree with Hayden, I believe that there is an objective good and bad. I think that that's contextually defined in LARP by bad ideas are the ones which have a bad out of character outcome. They're bad because I was ignored for 4 hours. They're bad because the GM refused to give us enough clues to solve the puzzle. They're bad ideas because that plot line is entirely unbelievable. It's not going to be because in character a bad thing happened. Bad things happening in character is great. Good things happening in character is great. Things happening in character is great. The good and bad judgment is entirely going to be based on your out of character subjective experience. So allowing your players to understand and roll with that, and creating a situation where good and bad in character experiences are good, starts people along that road to being able to throw things at the wall and see what sticks.
I'm sorry, just quickly. I think there is a flaw in that framing of the objectivity, because I agree with you that that is an objective judge of badness, but it requires you to look back at an idea that has already happened, and that's not valuable to players because you're making decisions in the moment. You need to be able to have some ability to predict what will happen, and sometimes you have no way to predict whether the outcome will, out of character, be good or bad to the people it affects, which is why I'm...
Yeah, but the more information you have, the more tools that you as the organizer or the writer give to your players, the more information they'll have to make those judgment calls in advance during play.
But hindsight, yeah. I think it's more a semantic thing, but yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Josiah.
That's okay. I don't remember what I was going to say because you were too interesting. Stop being so compelling, everyone.
Oh, no. I'm the biggest lobster on the seabed.
How utterly diplomatic of you, Josiah.
I try. I have a kind of random offering I wanted to try throw as an academic idea that I've been reading that I find really interesting, and I've been thinking about it as a useful way of thinking about how we create player communities. And it kind of builds off Bernie de Koven's The Play Community, which Des read some notes from in a previous panel. But it's this idea of the play ecosystem, which comes from a thinker called Celia Pierce. And one of the key parts of the play ecosystem is acknowledging that in this moment of playing the game, there are these two parallel imaginations going on. One is the imagination that the designer has to, or maybe what the designer is imagining their players will do within the game, and trying to anticipate that. And then there is the imagining the player is having to do to try and work out what the intent of the designer is. I just like that idea, and I wanted to offer it as a way of thinking about that for other budding designers. But I'm curious, just as an offering, what does that make you see anything? Does that ring true or resonate with experiences you guys have had as designers? I'd love to hear about your thoughts on that idea.
Well, sometimes it can lead to some really unfortunate situations where people are trying to be so clever they overthink a situation. Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind, is when that has somewhat backfired. Now, it's almost better from my perspective if the player isn't thinking about what I want. I feel like I'm losing them if that's the case. Like, I want them to be in character and just accepting what's happening for whatever what is in relation to their character. I don't want them to be thinking about what I'm trying to do. That's hard enough for me to do, you know? And it seems like whenever they start to go on that chain of thought, I mean, every so often it leads to some beautiful climax of narrative and they just nail it. But it's almost not as satisfying because it takes the surprise out of it. So yeah, I guess I try to put them into a situation where it's not quite clear what the intention is just yet. and that it reveals itself as it goes in, so they don't have the ability to sort of try to preempt what's going on too much. I mean, if you're watching a movie, you know where it's going. It's not as good, So, yeah, from my perspective, that's almost the what I'm trying to avoid, I suppose, is them to start imagining what I'm imagining. Sorry, Des.
Would you say that then, instead, that what you're really looking for in your game? Because when we've had conversations, that we've almost sort of made this kind of. We have said before that sometimes your game is as good as the players. Would you say more that you appreciate it or that what you're looking for generally is for players to be open to the spirit of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think so. Yeah, I every time a player walks in who's closed to the experience, it just ends up being a bit of a nightmare, honestly. Which I think is a problem I face more than the other LARP rights here, because I'm getting people who have no experience of opening up in that space. And this might be the first time they are faced with it. Yeah, so I'm not really sure if I can contribute in a useful way, given that.
No, that's a problem that we have as well. I've certainly encountered players both in Zeppelin and Black Powder who've come in with their own personal idea of exactly what they wanted to do with the game without really that much reference to the game as communicated to them. And while our communication is a lot more broad-based, perhaps, than Yukio's, like, if people are coming in and saying, well, I have this scripted scene that I want to play out at my game, regardless of what this particular event, like based on the events at the last game, regardless of what's happening at the actual event that I'm coming to this time, for me, that's a fail, because they're not playing in the spirit of the game that we're designing and communicating to them. While paradoxically, my response to Josiah's question would be like, design without intent and be prepared for players to do what players will do and be happy. It is still important to design with intent as to how the players do and be happy. There's a lot of doublethink that goes on in my design stuff, but yeah, same basically.
It strikes me that it's there seems to be, as a designer, two things that's always being kind of designed, because you've got the system of the game and you're designing the experience for a player. And then there is the story of the game and designing the experience a character is going to go through. Does that kind of help delineate that doublethink a bit for you, Rob?
No, I'd just say that those are the same thing, and separating them is a fallacy.
I actually think it does help me a little bit. I guess this came from the Ludo Narrative panel, in which we sort of identified that or one way of looking at it, I should say, one lens you can use is that the narrative is for the character and the mechanics are for the player. And so in that sense, when it comes to the mechanics of the player, I would like it if they did try to think about what I was trying to do a bit, because it does help when they're faced with, in my case, puzzles. And I think puzzles still exist in LARP, generally speaking. I think you could say broadly that whether it was the forensics in Zeppelin or the politics in Black Powder, it is a kind of puzzle they're trying to solve. And so for them to think about the mechanics and what the mechanics are trying to achieve is actually helpful. So getting back to Jai's point about imagination, but when it comes to the narrative and the character, that's not where I want them at all. I want them to be oblivious to the fact that there's a creator and a writer. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing that I was about to say has gone from my brain. So
it is late.
Me. Sorry, Josiah. Could you pose what you were saying again, please?
I was actually going to, because I am aware of the time, I was going to throw in a different question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know, I'm a devil. What should you never ask of your players? Or what
Would you kill a
can't you
man
ask
for
of your players?
$1,000?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
like,
guess.
I think the character I played at Black Power and Bloodline I played would definitely kill a man for $1,000. I don't think Josiah would. Anyway, sorry. But yes, what do you think?
So I think that the thing that you should never ask your players to do is to force them to do something that they're really uncomfortable with doing. It makes the play that they are doing kind of scary, anxiety-inducing. As we heard from Madeline when she was describing to us her archery experience way back when. Trying to force your players into something that they really do not want to go into is not play. It's just a traumatic experience, really. So I think that if you've got something that, so for example, in the Cowboy LARP, I have, as I've talked to you, Josiah, and I've talked to most people on this panel, except for Rob, because he doesn't know about the thing, but you know, there is levels of sort of themes that are quite hard to go through. So two of the themes that are in the Cowboy Sci-Fi LARP are death and grief, or tragedy, and those are very difficult themes to tackle, and also big emotions to tackle. And you know, when I first started, you know, creating rules or mechanics around those things, some of the things that came up for me in terms of showing them to other people and saying, "What do you think about this?" You know, some of the worry was that, you know, what if someone's actually not very comfortable with doing this? And so as I guess as Rob has kind of told to me before, when I was first learning about how to kind of go about designing and writing a LARP, was to build in, I guess, difficulty dials, so that there are varying levels of interacting still with the game in its intended way, but that there are levels in which you can give choice to the player for which they can interact with it, instead of just sort of like being like, sorry, that's the way it is. Like, if you don't like it, get out of here. And that's not to say that, like, sometimes there are going to be LARPs that just aren't suited to you, and that's okay as well. There are going to be definitely LARPs out there that are. But if you are trying to be much more accessible at all levels, it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, I think what I would say on that regard is there should never be anything about your game that makes players compelled to enter a situation that makes them feel unsafe or uncomfortable. And I think it's important to acknowledge the difference between being uncomfortable or unsafe and being uncertain. I think being uncertain is fine. And I think it's okay to enter a situation where you feel unsafe and uncomfortable if you didn't feel compelled and you entered it willingly. Because, yes, there are risks there still, and you are aware of those risks, and it could still go badly, but, you know, there's an element there more of informed consent. But when you have, and yeah, as Desney mentioned, sort of the big thing with Madeline's story was that feeling of compulsion or obligation to do the thing. And it's like, you know, sort of in terms of subject matter, I would never put on the table, like, sexual violence is probably the big one for me. I would probably never, ever include that in a game. I feel like it's possible there could exist a game where you explored that, but it would be very hard, and I don't know if you should do that. But again, it should never feel like something that people are compelled to do. Because when you start compelling your players to do things, and the things that you're compelling them to do are feel unsafe or uncomfortable, that's That's not good. That's not a game anymore. That's a different thing, and it's not nice. Yeah, and I think it's like if you're like you want to include that, you need to make sure, as Destiny mentioned, either there are like sliding scales or difficulty dials, or like just the option to know, like the ability to know ahead of time, and to, if you like are like, cool, this thing is happening, I'm going to disclude from myself from it and feel no guilt for discluding myself, because there was no pressure on me to take part, and I don't feel bad that all these other people are doing it and I am not. So yeah, I think that's where I stand on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to someone who hadn't attended the Hollits Hoedown, but who had lots of friends in their friend circle that did. And they said that some of the overwhelming feedback that they got in terms of why it was enjoyable was because they didn't feel as if they were obligated to take part in anything. There wasn't any sort of like, I mean, like maybe you go to like Quest or to Black Powder and Bloodlines, and there's lots of exciting things that are happening, or even after the fall. Like you feel like you can't sit down or take a rest because there's always going to be something that's going on, and you need to be part of it in order to be playing. And so you get really, really exhausted and run off your feet, which is great. I do love the feeling of those things sometimes. But something that they had reported back to us was that there was a feeling of like there was absolutely no obligation to that. All the rest, all of the I'm not actually going to play cricket with you right now, Mr. Redhead Man who was yelling at me. And that's going to be okay. Sorry, I had to do it. You've threw me under the bus before.
Our cricket god in heaven.
So, I think that giving options in terms of how much interaction or maybe gentleness, how hard you go, how ham your players are able to go, is definitely, I mean, like Rob has in Black Powder and Bloodlines, a horror element to Black Powder and Bloodlines in which you can play a much more dangerous game. I guess, from this sort of standpoint, that's a difficulty dial because it is a scarier and harder and more lethal game to play if you were playing the blood game.
But you opt into it.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a slight maybe like a add-on or aside to make. Of course, we all agree with those points. You shouldn't force anyone to do anything they don't want to do. Uncomfortable situations are tricky to put in front of players because sometimes uncomfortable situations can be really rich and really enjoyable. And so I guess what I might boil it down to is that if you do intend or really would love to put players in an uncomfortable situation, make sure they have an NPC companion who is their rock, who is going to look after them emotionally and make sure that they can oversee that scene and flag it if it's or pull them out of it if it's going in the direction.
Like a way to opt out.
Yeah, but well, I mean, so ultimately you want the player to always have an option between. So they never want to just have one thing that they can do. And that was what I was going to say before these other comments, is just even at the very end or when they're faced with the big bad, they should still have the option of trying to barter or walk away, and that's legitimate, for example. But I guess in regards to uncomfortable situations, I was thinking about it because there's a part in Deep Space 2 where I railroad the players onto a planet which they've been warned it's a bad idea, but they have an AI companion dog with them the whole time, and it therefore has never been a problem. Because that NPC is just their rock and is just for always saying, you can do it. I believe in you. Don't worry. We got this. We'll get out of it. And so that's never gone wrong. Although I suppose it could one day, but we've had a few hundred players. And so far, I think I could say that's probably the if, let's say. If you are going to have players enter something that's uncomfortable or a bit out of their comfort zone, just arm them with a really great NPC.
Yeah, I'd like to broaden that out and say, like, explicitly answer Josiah's question is that what you can't ask your players to do is something that you haven't prepared them for. And that includes like making sure that they're aware of themes going in, making sure the difficulty dials are present, making sure that they have resources that they can turn to if they're going to be faced with a challenging situation. But that also applies for the more mundane stuff too. If you've prepared your players for a medieval game, throwing in sci-fi elements is going to throw them out. That's unfair. That's unreasonable. That's bad design. It doesn't mean that you can't surprise them, but the surprises should all be within the same paradigm that of the rest of your creation. The same way that people will piss and moan for hours and hours and hours, and then say, "But why?" Dragons can't breathe fire in this world, but that one's breathing fire. But because you haven't prepared the audience for it. It's exactly the same. That no matter what the rules are of your creation, like internally, you need to prepare people for that. The same way that you should think of throwing weird or unpleasant or unpredictable stuff at them in it from an out of character perspective, because there's definitely no hard line about what kind of content or what kind of experience you can give your players. One of the most memorable things that always sticks in my mind when about designing and running LARPs is I was with some other organizers. They were having a smoke after a con. I was hanging out, and a couple of people ran up to us, like physically shaking, visibly shook to their core. They like, if it was not outside a LARP con, I'd be very concerned for their well-being. But they came up and said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, can we bum a smoke with you guys? I've been through hell. I've been through like a really intense, like the worst day of my life. Oh fuck, it was enjoyable. I wish I could do it again." Like, if someone goes into an event that's really stressful and really like potentially traumatic, but they consent to it, it's good. That's okay. The same way that I'm not going to kink shame someone who's into hardcore BDSM. I'm not going to kink shame someone who's into hardcore stress LARP. Like, we have priests at Black Powder. They're playing hardcore stress LARP. And that's all cool because you prepare your players for it. You signal, this is the kind of material that you're going to come into contact with. You don't have to signal it explicitly. You can signal it through textual material and rely on them being grown-ups who are able to read. Or sometimes you can take them aside and say, "Hey, so you're playing a priest. Are you sure? Because we've broken a couple of them so far." Like, as long as you prepare your players, then everything's on the table. Except, like, would you kill a man for $1,000? Probably don't do that. Yeah.
Fair point. Figure. I guess, what would you say, and I'll pose this question to everyone, what do you think is a serious step in the process in empowering player input? Like, just any type of thing that you feel is, something that empowers player input.
So, just straight out of the gate, keyword that sentence, power in empower. In a play space, the organizers and writers and GMs, by definition, have more power than the players. If you're wanting your players to put ideas out there and roll with one another's ideas in a very open and accepting way, if you want to empower them in doing that, you, as the powerful members of that play space, should also be interacting with your players in that way. So if you take their ideas and roll with them and include their ideas as part of the play space and endorse those ideas through the power your team has, that's empowering them, because it's adding the power of the group with power in that space to those ideas.
I think I can just summarize my point of this is just you have to trust them, as difficult as that is. I think Des said something along the lines of, like, the best players are engaged. They're going to be engaged. You have to empower them, and to empower them, you have to trust them. So I think I don't think I could have put it better than that. So
I'm
Yeah,
pretty smart
essentially,
sometimes.
it's this true. Essentially, all the advice comes down to a version of what Hayden said. Like, treat your players, unless they're literal children, don't you treat your players like children. Ensure that you put them in a situation where they're capable of making reasonable, rational decisions. When they give you critical feedback, take that feedback on board, be seen to be taking that feedback on board, assessing it critically, and then rejecting it for good reasons if you're going to reject it, or if you don't have a good reason, accept it. And not like just flat out removing all criticism from, say, your Facebook page and banning people from your event who have critical things to say in a public sphere, because it is well known that no publicly delivered criticism or even privately delivered criticism will be taken on board, fostering a culture where you engage with your player base and take their criticism from a place of honest humility. Very humble, yes. It's important that when you're engaging with criticism, that you come from a place of honest humility, because saying, "Hey, players, you have power," you literally have that is empowering.
For me, well, I'm going to come from a player perspective because I can't think of how I would foster this, but I feel like what I often need most as a player is affirmations that I'm playing well, and I think Black Powder and Bloodlines will often do that very well because it's affirming decisions I'm making and affirming the experiences I'm having by basically no one breaking immersion and being like, "Whoa, hey, don't do that." And I think a key part of that, Rob, as you said, is being able to hear feedback. So there is the option to hear what one person's experience is and then go, yeah, cool, I affirm the decision you're making there, or I affirm the character choice you've made there, or what have you. Yeah, I think that captures it. Affirmation.
I accept your negative feedback about our food situation, but it sounds to me like you really just don't like sandwiches. If you tell us next time, we'll ensure that you don't get sandwiches, but everyone else wanted sandwiches, so we gave them sandwiches. So I'm very sorry that you had this experience. We'll ensure you don't have sandwiches again, but we're not changing the menu just because you don't like sandwiches. Sorry.
I don't remember saying anything about sandwiches, but great.
I think that was a hypothetical.
Yes.
That is not a hypothetical. That is a previous experience.
What are you going to do, eh?
I guess just to go into I don't think I probably answered your question. The best way to empower them, for me, it's just they can change the course of the story with just conversation. I'm always like that. Maybe that's not theoretical enough, but I think it's. When I think about my most enjoyable moments, even in video games, is when your charisma stat is so high you can cause an end boss to shoot themselves. I Mass Effect 1. I just love it when you're faced with a seemingly impossible situation and just a conversation is the solution, and that results in a huge confluence of narrative. And so I just love it, in regards to empowering players, making sure that combat isn't the most powerful part of the game.
Well, yeah, it's basically that, like, if players have power to affect a space and know they have the power to affect a space, then they will feel like they have the power to affect the space, and that is what empowerment is. That's literally what it describes. And given that, again, the game creators are the people with the power, you are able to basically grant that to your players, or let them know that you won't use it against them or use it to stymie them in some way. Because the players, if you want them to feel empowered, they need to have the power to affect the space.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Is there any other questions that anyone has to sort of pose to everyone else?
I've got a wrap-up one for you all, if you'd like.
Right, yes.
In one sentence, knowing everything you know now, think back to the player you were when you played your first LARP, and thinking about what it is to play well. What advice would you give that player? One sentence.
The one thing that I have said to myself at least once at every single LARP I have ever played, and this is going to be like grossly hypocritical, but the one thing I have told myself at every single LARP I've ever played at least once is, look, just ignore the orgs, just play the game. That's the way to have fun. And part of why I participate in this panel is to ensure that no one ever has to say that to themselves ever again. But yeah, like if you are a player who is watching this stream, just ignore the orgs, have fun, whatever. If you're a writer who is watching this stream, Jesus Christ, don't let that happen.
I think for me, the big one would be don't interpret the game hierarchically or in an elitist way. Because if you tolerate or if you don't like a thing in the space and your response to it is just to hate it for fun, it doesn't go away and the space isn't improved. Which is something I started doing, but I wish I'd started doing earlier, and I wish I'd taken that into when I started to have power over other players. Because feedback is incredibly important part of my life on a very personal level, and as a player and as a person who's increasingly had more and more power within the LARP community over other people, it's important that I be a transparent node for information and feedback. And if I am accepting feedback but then not giving it out, or I'm giving feedback but then not accepting it, I'm failing that. And hating people because what they do is bad quality, or not even hating it, just mocking it for your own entertainment, like that's fun, but it doesn't make anything better. And I should not have done that.
Thanks, Hayden. That's a big admission. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess for me, other than bitch relax, I would probably say concentrate on how you make others feel. Your fun will come from everyone else having a good time, not just what you're trying to drive towards. I'm a very goals-oriented person, so I think that sometimes you can lose sight of actually having fun, or it being just a fucking hobby, so just relax. That it becomes something that you can perfect. And that's not what the aim is. Yeah.
Love that.
And just briefly, Kenyon has very usefully come onto the stream and said, research your character, don't be a hero, become a hero, and just have fun. Jack, would you like to go?
Become a hero, that's massive. Well, I guess the advice I would give to ourselves, right, when we started, yeah, I would say you have to debrief. Even if you don't think you do, you have to debrief with the other people you've LARPed with. And I think that for me, I'm someone who I absorb confrontation in my stride, and I sort of just have my own way of dealing with it. But I think I've definitely damaged friendships in the community because I've undervalued the impact the character interactions were having on the people underneath. And I was sort of the the stupid perception that, oh, it was in character, they understand that I don't actually dislike them, or that whatever the interaction may have been. It's a nice theory that people can, or that emotions don't work like that somehow. But my advice would definitely be that you need to debrief with anyone you had a serious scene with, because you have no idea where they're at or what they've been going through outside of the LARP anyway. I mean, I remember going to that, and I think in turn I would have also benefited from that from other people as well. So but you open the door by extending the olive branch to begin with. So I think that would have been for me, because I think I'm somewhat unapproachable sometimes without being aware of it, because I have a resting bitch face. So yeah.
I wouldn't say that. I think you have more of I think your face is a little bit more affable than that.
Maybe
I have a resting bitch face. But I also have a resting, awkwardness that comes off as, please don't talk to me.
Feel that?
Wait, no, hang on.
Yeah, I feel that too, actually.
I have autism. I don't know when it's appropriate or how to make eye contact with people. So I do too much or too little of it. I make people uncomfortable because I avert their gaze, because I don't know when it's polite to lock eyes with them. Yeah.
Big boy moves.
Cool. Is that you just do you feel like you...
Do you have one?
Do I have one? I really should, because I'm literally researching this. I'm thinking about it all the time. Look, see, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about it of what do I want to explore as a player right now? And so it's the advice I would give to myself at the moment, because I'm curious about this, is if you're feeling something in game, your character is feeling something as well, which is something I've spoken with Des about before, and that is material that you can use to play with. And if you can foster a space where that's available to players, especially new players, that's exciting. And that's still something I'm learning to do. To be like, oh, I'm stressed. Oh, the character's stressed. Cool. And then I suppose the other side of that as well is that what your character does not necessarily reflect on you as a person.
Betrayal is not endorsement.
Yeah, I really appreciated that principle that you brought up in, I think it was the panel last Saturday, because I've thought about that a lot. I often try and play villainous characters, but I really fail at being villainous, I think, because I'm just like, sorry, I don't mean to be so rude. Yeah, and so, Jack, your point about debriefing is a really important one as well on that, because, remembering that, of course, you can go up to people out of character afterwards and say, hey, I hope that was okay, or thanks for that great experience. It's useful to remember that.
Well, even becoming a villain on purpose, so you have an excuse to indulge cruelty toward people you dislike out of character, which is something that I have certainly done to some degree in my own history, because it was in a competitive space where my character was designed to be competitive, so I could be like, yeah, it's in character, it's fine, what I did was fine, and it's like, what I did was not fine.
No.
I indulged cruelty on purpose, but, created a situation where that would be an okay thing to do. And I'm definitely not the worst person I know for doing that. I was restrained, but even then, any amount of that is bad. And you should not treat other people like that. But it ties back to the whole thing of, again, don't be elitist. Because if you indulge in this thing of other people's ideas are bad, it's easy to hate that person because they're an idiot. And then it becomes easy to mistreat them because you're smarter than they are and they therefore deserve it.
And that's even easier again when you're running the game.
Yeah, so it's so important to not see yourself as better than other people, because the knock-on effects from that are so destructive.
Yeah. and it it really it goes from the top down. Like that's how you can get really toxic communities, is where you've got a GM or an organization and that just is not designing with the intention of love towards their player base. But yeah, I mean, as much as it's harsh from Hayden, yeah, absolutely. You can't do it. It's not going to be constructive, and it won't be helpful, and it won't be healthy. So yeah, there are definitely big lines that you have to draw when doing that. Exploring, not acting too much, I guess, in that sense. From Kenya.
Sure. Speaking of healthy, it's my bedtime, so I got to roll.
Yeah. Okay, no worries. I guess let's wrap it up there. Just to all of our viewers, we will be having another live stream. We'll probably post about it when we know it's going to be closer to getting a date and a time down. But the next stream that we're going to go through is feedback on your baby, critiques. So I'd really love to have all of you on board again. I know that Josiah and Jack in particular were really interested in giving their collaboration on this subject. And I know that Rob is quite passionate about it as well, and has a lot of experience in that regard. If you're all happy to come back for the next one, I'm happy to have you. But I guess we'll work that out.
Woo! Yeah!
Yay! And quickly, I'd just like to give a shout out to Kenyon for being such an active and a brilliant participant in the live stream, and also for bringing me bread halfway through the stream.
Champion.
Love bread. Love bread delivery.
You're going to survive the winter.
Bread in autumn. That's what you can get it. Free winter bread.
I have so much, I guess.
This is now a bread ASMR stream.
That's right. Yeah, 10 p.m. That's when it switches over.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you so much to all of our live stream chatters.
Shout out to the confused person who just arrived.
Yeah.
Watch the VOD, friend. Sorry.
This will be up on the channel. It will also be up on YouTube soon. Confused person who just arrived. If you're interested in going back 2.5 hours.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm really excited about the next the next panel that we get into, and I'm also really, really excited about the things that we've sort of delved in here today. So yeah, thank you everyone for your input and your expertise and your genius, and I hope that everyone has a really, really great night. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, the best.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone for coming. Remember,
Bye.
capital
Bye,
will
audience.
undo us all.
Yeah, down with the state.
And capital. Sana Vita.